Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Torah Talk Weekly Parsha. This week we're going to be discussing Numbers, chapter 19, Chukat, or Chukas, however you want to pronounce that. Welcome back, Rabbi. It's always a pleasure to see you here. Everybody's getting some really excellent feedback on your presence here at the channel, and we just love it. And it's doing great. It's the weekly food that we all long for. At least I do, for sure. I know everybody else does too. So definitely find agreement across the board with that. So welcome back.
Okay. Thank you for having me back. It's my pleasure. Hashem should please give me the ability to open my mouth and speak the words he wants me to speak. As we know, is whatever happens during this hour.
Yes.
So thank you for the introduction. Yes, Parshas Chukas or Chukat, beginning Numbers 19. I want to start as usual, although where I go from here, no one knows. I'm going to try to stick to the script of a little housekeeping laundry list of the topics that come up in the Parsha. And then hopefully I can return to some of the points and broaden them and deepen them.
Excellent. It's all good, regardless of where you go.
Chapter 19.
It's kind of like saying.
You can interrupt me, William. Go ahead.
It's kind of like your approach is just fine no matter how you do it, because it's kind of like you got a great big plate of just all this amazing food. You know, whether you reach over and grab a green bean or if you grab a piece of that wonderful steak, it's all so good. Wherever you go, it usually ends up being something really delicious on the plate. So just do you, just do you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna try to do what Hashem wants me to do.
I mean.
So, first of all, we have in chapter 19, Numbers chapter 19, the topic of the red heifer. In Hebrew, this is called the Parah Aduma. And the Parsha starts out, why is it called Chukas? Again, it always takes its name from the beginning of the Parsha, which begins with the words Zos Chukas HaTorah. I'm doing it already. But Zos Chukas HaTorah, which means this is the word chok that we covered way back in the first class in this series that I did, Parshas Bechukosai, right? When it says, if you will walk in my chukos, which is translated as statutes. And we explained in that class that a chok, singular, is a law that does not have a logical explanation. It's a mysterious law. It appears to us to have only ritual significance, and as opposed to, we said, a mishpat, which is like a logical law, like don't kill, don't steal, ritual laws, like eat this, don't eat that, wear this, don't wear that type of stuff. So, blow a horn on this day, eat a flatbread on that day, sit in a hut on this day, pick up some branches of these species on those days, right? Put leather straps on your body in this place and that place, write this inside the box, puts a scroll on your door. Mysterious things. We do them because God commands them. And like I said then, we can seek to find rational explanations or even worldly benefits, but ultimately we recognize that the command derives from God, and the reason we do it is because God said so, and only He truly knows the full spiritual significance. So that was Bechukosai. We talked about that. So here we come back to that in Parsha of Chukas. This is the Chukas HaTorah, the statute of the Torah. This is the statute of the Torah. So again, if it's the chok of the Torah, there are many chukim. There are many of these types of laws, as I just explained. So what does it mean? This is the chok of the Torah, like there's only one. So our rabbis explain, and we don't need rabbis to explain it. It just so happens that we receive our wisdom from them. But that of all the chukim, of all the so-called mysterious laws, this is the most mysterious one. And the reason for that is that this animal, as we'll see, is burned, and its ashes are used to purify someone who has become spiritually impure with the highest level of spiritual impurity, which is that of contact with the dead body. And I hope to elaborate on this topic. But he falls into a deep place of spiritual impurity, which forbids him from all kinds of contacts with sacred materials, and certainly no entry no entry into the temple, and there's a very grave punishment from heaven called karet, which is spiritual excision. I'm not going to go into the topic of what that is. Needless to say, it's something very bad that happens to the soul. If one would enter the sanctuary, enter the temple or the tabernacle in this state of spiritual defilement, the defilement which comes from contact with the dead body. And somehow these ashes, mixed with water and some other ingredients, when sprinkled on the person, combined with immersion in a mikvah 2 times over the course of 7 days, once on the 3rd day, once on the 7th day, is going to bring this person out of the state of impurity, goes from the lowest state of impurity to full spiritual cleanliness, if you will. And again, I'm going to try to broaden the definitions of those words, God willing. But at the same time, it talks about the Kohanim, the priests who were involved in helping the person along this procedure, are rendered tamei, are rendered spiritually impure in the process. That somehow the very same substance that is used to bring a person up, to uplift a person from a spiritual contamination, serves to at the same time spiritually defile the ones who are involved in the process of purifying the other. Now, just to clarify on that, because when I was a kid and I learned this, I had a misunderstanding. I thought this fellow, let's call him Yankel, becomes spiritually impure on the level of what's called Av HaTumah, the father of impurity, the highest level of impurity, because of contact with a dead body. And then the priest who goes through the process of purifying him trades off, Now you got it. I have to explain that. Now you got it. For those of you who might have seen the movie The Exorcist, I saw it many, many years ago. But my father told me an amusing story when he was in the theater seeing The Exorcist, and so at the end, when he exorcises spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie and you want to, close your ears. At the end, when the priest manages to exorcise the demon out of her, whatever was in her, right? So it goes into him. Like suddenly he realizes, like, oh, it's in, and then he jumps out the window and he kills himself in order not to be defiled by this demon, right? Not to give the demon that hold in his body. But my father said when he was sitting in the theater, you realize that the demon moved from the girl to the priest. So somebody in the theater called out, "Now you got it." You have to imagine in Brooklyn, New York, somewhere, someone with like a heavy Brooklyn accent. "Now you got it." I don't know. I thought that was funny. But anyway, so that's what I thought it was with here. He's spiritually defiled, and then the priest comes in and he cleans him up, and then he becomes tamei. So it's like, now you got it. I thought it was now you got it. So then I was like, oh, now he needs a priest to do him, and then he's going to get it. And it's like, tag, you're it, and it never ends. And I'm like, what was the point? Just leave it in the first guy. How is this going anywhere? So I want to clear that misconception later when I studied it more properly, not on a childish level. I told you there's like different gradations of spiritual impurity. So this is the highest level. It requires a 7-day purification process with the ashes of the red heifer, this very rare cow that was only born every so many generations, and they had to keep the ashes stored, and they used the ashes for hundreds of years at a time because they didn't know when the next red heifer was coming. So they used it very sparingly, mixing it with the water. I don't know the exact recipe, the proportions, but the Mishnah records how many red heifers there were over the course of the temple period, and who burned them, and how long their ashes lasted, etc. So where am I going? The priest which receives somehow mysteriously impurity in the process of purifying the other fellow Yankel is a low level of impurity. That's a single day impurity. It's called a tivul yom. Tivul yom means that he immerses in the mikveh, in the ritual water, the same day, and that evening he becomes spiritually cleansed and can proceed with all his ritual stuff. So it's not like it's a you got it and it's a never-ending cycle. He's fully impure. He gets treated. Somehow in this process, the one doing the purification becomes himself impurified on some low level, and he goes and he can take care of that without the ashes of the red heifer, and we can get everybody pure again. I had that misconception in my head for so many years growing up until I studied it, that I didn't want to leave that impression out. So that's the mystery of the red heifer, is how can something which purifies at the same time make impure? It seems to be a complete contradiction and enigma, and so much so that King Solomon, who was the wisest of all men, who studied the Torah more deeply than anyone and is said to have understood, he actually was able to understand the meaning of all the chukim. To that degree he was sagacious, is that he was actually able to decipher the mystery of all the chukim, with the exception of the red heifer. With the exception of the red heifer. He said about that in Koheles Ecclesiastes, which is written by King Solomon, chapter 7, verse 23. He says, Amarti echkema, I said I shall become wise, vehi rachoka mimeni, but it is distant from me. And in what way was wisdom distant from him? From him, he was very, very wise. So what did he mean by that? Our rabbis tell us he meant in the matter of chukas haTorah, the one chok that the Torah identifies as, this is it, this is the mystery of the Torah. In that area, he never figured out. So I'm going to move on from there, hopefully to come back to it. But that's the idea of the mystery of the red heifer, that it purifies and at the same time makes impure. Wasn't even deciphered by King Solomon. The second topic we have is in chapter 20, verses 1 to 13, and that is the death of Miriam, Moshe's sister, and subsequently we find that the Jews are thirsting for water. Now, all this time, we're at the end of 40 years now. We're in the final year in the desert, and we did a jump cut from last week. Korach, which most commentaries say was immediately following the spy, so it was still in the second year. We have a jump cut to the final year. We jumped 38 years, and here we are in the final year. We know they had this well of water, this miraculous well of water that had emerged from the rock back in Parshas B'Shalach in the book of Exodus, that had given them water all through the 40 years. Suddenly, at the end of 40 years, there's no water. So from here, we understand that it was in the merit of the righteous prophetess Miriam that the water was given through this rock. And once she had died and her merit was no longer present, the Jewish people once again thirsted for water because the rock ceased providing a well of water. Now, when I say the rock, I mean, it seems in some way the rock seems to have traveled with them through the desert in some miraculous fashion, bringing the well of water with it. And now it was no more. So we have God commanding Moshe and Aaron, seemingly, Moshe and Aaron are seemingly, I mean, I say seemingly because there's a lot of mystery here, and there's a lot of discussion what exactly the meaning of this section is. But at the most face value, it seems that God commands Moses and Aaron to speak to the rock and in that way bring forth water, as opposed to the first time where God has Moses strike the rock to bring out the water. Here he tells Moses and Aaron, you too go speak to the rock. We find Moshe strikes the rock 2 times, not once, but twice. Waters, it says abundant waters flow out and the people drink. But God takes Moshe and Aaron aside. He says, you guys sinned. It says a very strange thing. He says, Ya'an lo ha'amantem bi. You didn't, lo ha'amantem means you didn't have emunah in me. You didn't have faith in me. You didn't have belief in me. So how could you say that to Moses and Aaron? They didn't have faith in God. Very strange thing. He says, you failed to sanctify me in the eyes of the congregation, and for this reason, you're not going to pass into the promised land. You're going to die here in the desert. It's a very strange thing. What exactly was the sin of Moshe? Meaning, even at face value, oh, God said speak, and he hit. So if God said speak, why did he hit? And what was the big deal about hitting? What was wrong? I mean, and if it was, he wasn't supposed to hit it, why did the water come out when he hit it? And you know, and if, okay, so he hit it. For that, he's going to be, oh, Moshe, for all your hard work, you hit the rock. It's just a rock. Who cares? Hit the rock, okay, hit the rock. You're not going into life. Very strange. I hope to return to this. If I don't, you're going to all be mad at me because I set it up. So that is, again, in verses 1 to 13 in chapter 20, we have the death of Miriam, the disappearance of the well, and Moshe and Aaron seemingly restoring the well, but in some way deviating from God's command and being castigated for that and refused entry into the promised land. Now, following that section, we have verses 14 to 21. The nation of Israel comes to the border of Edom, the nation of Edom, which are descendants of Esau, and they say, hey, you're our brother. Let us pass through your land. Edom says nothing doing. He doesn't allow them to pass through the land, so they have to go around. And on the way, verses 22 to 29, we have Aaron's death, the death of Aharon, the high priest, Moshe's brother, at the age of 123 years old. Miriam was 126 years old. She was 6 years older than Moshe, and Aaron is 3 years older than Moshe. We have Aaron's death at a place called Hor Hahar. Ahar is a mountain. This is sometimes translated as Mount Hor. And Aaron is brought up to the mountain. He passes away there, and Moshe takes Aaron's clothing and he gives it to his son Elazar, the son of Aaron, to become the next high priest. In fact, he does this ceremony before Aaron dies so that Aaron merits to see his son filling his place before he leaves this world, and he has that comfort that his son is continuing after him. There's a lot to say about that, but I don't think we're going to have time in this hour, so we're going to leave it at that. Chapter 21, verses 1 to 3, we have the war with Canaan. Now, they're passing the southern border of Canaan, and they're attacked by the Canaanites. I'm just going to let you in on a little secret. Our rabbis tell us that these Canaanites were, at least to some degree, partially Amalekites in disguise. Why the rabbis felt the need to point that out, in what way is that apparent from the verse, why is that significant, is a big topic that I'm not planning to speak about in the limited time we have, so we'll leave that a bit of a mystery. There's a war with Canaan. I'll just fill you in this. Why were they suddenly attacked? They were attacked by Amalek. This might be part of the clue. They were attacked by Amalek when they left Egypt. We don't find anyone else attacking them, I don't know, unless it's slipping my memory. Suddenly, right, even Edom said, you may not pass through our land. They didn't attack them. Suddenly, Aaron dies, and they get attacked again. So one of the insights here is that the Jewish people were covered by what's called clouds of glory. There were these miraculous clouds that encompassed the camp. They hid the camp from view in a certain way. It just looked like sort of a fog passing through the desert. But inside that great big fog was a giant nation that was being shielded from enemies, shielded from the elements, and other miracles were taking place. The Torah says openly in the book of Deuteronomy, I don't have a citation in front of me, that their clothing didn't wither on them. They're walking 40 years and their clothing miraculously grew as they grew. It didn't wither. Their shoes didn't wear out on their feet, and so on. These clouds were responsible for caring for the well-being of the Jews in a very special way. In addition, I'll tell you that the holiday of Sukkot, where we build these outdoor huts, the outdoor huts are meant to remind us of the clouds of glory in the desert that surrounded us. That's actually the meaning of this flimsy hut we built, is to remember how God surrounded us with wispy, flimsy walls and covering in the desert, and that miraculously preserved us and shielded us. So suddenly, we're meant to understand that just like with the death of Miriam, the well disappeared, the juxtaposition of the death of Aaron with the attack from an outside nation, they came out of their borders. We weren't in Canaan yet. So if these were Canaanites, they were coming out of their borders to attack us. But again, a rabbi tells these were actually Amalekites disguised as Canaanites, so that for the reason being, I'm saying more than I was planning to say, but that they knew the power of Jewish prayer. They knew the power of Jewish prayer. In fact, in the first war with Amalek, Moshe raised his hands. It says when Moshe raised his hands, they would win. And when his hands got tired and he put them down, they would start losing. So the Mishnah asks, what Moshe's hands make war or break war? That's literally the words, make or break. That's the words used in the Mishnah. Did Moshe's hands make war or break war? No. When he lifted his hands to heaven, it was a sign for to the Jewish people, look up to heaven, look up to God, look up to Hashem for your salvation, pray to him, believe in him, have faith in him, and he will save you. But when his hands got tired, they went down, and the people were not focusing on heaven, so then they didn't have that salvation. So rather, the signal was pray to God. So we know Aaron and Hur, they came and they held Moshe's hands up. So the Jews would always remember, pray, pray, pray. And it was the power of prayer. It was the power of prayer that helped them defeat them. It's very interesting. There was an illustration. There was a beautiful illustration done by a certain children's artist where the army of the Jewish nation is sort of confronting the army of Amalek. And you see the army of Amalek, they're coming with their swords and weapons and whatnot. And the army of the Jews, they're coming with their Sidurim, their prayer books. Now, of course, that's an anachronism, and I'm sure they had weapons and they didn't have printed books in those days. But this imagery for kids is like, what really makes war and breaks war? It's God. So in as much as we're connected to God and we're reaching out to God and we're putting our faith in God and we're praying to God and we're asking from God, is to the extent we can expect success. So here the Amalekites had a different strategy. They said, let's dress up as Canaanites. And they're going to say, God, please save us from the Canaanites. Please deliver us from the Canaanites. Please deliver the Canaanites into our hands. And we're not Canaanites. So their prayers will be in vain, right? This was the strategy of Amalek to disguise themselves as Canaan. There's other clues that these were Amalekites. But suddenly, even back then when the Amalekites attacked, it said, who did they attack? Kol hanechesh sholim acharecha. Those who were straggling behind you. Why were there stragglers? Stragglers means that they were outside of the clouds of glory, right? These clouds that protected the camp, there were people outside. Well, why were they outside? That they were sort of straggling, hanging back behind the clouds. So rabbis tell us these were the sinners. And because they didn't have the proper merit, the clouds couldn't protect them. So it says they were ejected from the clouds, whatever that means. I don't think anyone pushed them out by hand, but somehow, I don't know, a wind or something, they were just blown out from the clouds. I always think, whenever I think of like them getting ejected from the clouds, I think, I'm a silly guy, I'm sorry. I think of a guy telling Lashon Hara to his friend. He's like, oh my goodness. You want to hear what Shmelki did? Let me tell you this. And as he's telling Lashon Hara, all of a sudden, like an ejection seat in a fighter plane, like, it just goes fly. He's just flying through the air, and then he just like lands outside the cloud. I think of like Brainy Smurf from the Smurfs. So those of that generation. Papa Smurf always says, all of a sudden, bonk, he lands outside the village. That's always the way I thought about it. I don't know how it actually looked, but I have a funny imagination. So the cloud pushed them out. So the Amalekites were only able to attack the vulnerable ones because they were outside of the cloud. So here, what happened? Aaron dies, and the Canaanites/Amalekites attack. How did the people become vulnerable? So just like Miriam died, and without her merit, they lost the well of water. It was Aaron's merit that was responsible for the clouds of glory. And when he died, the clouds of glory left. Our rabbis tell us there were 3 miracles in the desert that were brought about because of the merit of 3 people. The well for Miriam, the clouds for Aaron, and the manna, what's called the mun in Hebrew, the manna in the merit of Moshe. So when Miriam died, the well was gone until Moshe restored it. When Aaron died, the clouds were gone. And I'm not clear that they were restored in any way. It doesn't seem so. Because there's a lot right after this, we get into wars and wars and wars. So they suddenly became vulnerable after Aaron dies. And the mun is until Moshe's death. So the manna. So, okay. So we have the war with Amalek. The Jews defeat them roundly. Let's move on. The next topic is in chapter 21, verses 4 through 9, is that the Jews complained about the manna. Sorry, the only thing they have left. They complain about the manna, and suddenly they become vulnerable to attack by snakes. These were also the snakes and the scorpions and the wild beasts of the desert were also kept out by the clouds. They get attacked by these venomous snakes, and they're being poisoned. And God instructs Moshe to make a copper facsimile of a snake, put it on some type of a big pole, a big tall rod, and the Jews should look up at it and be healed. This is also quoted in the same Mishnah that quotes about Moshe's hands. It says, what is this? Copper snake, it heals and what? No. Rather, it was by putting the snake on the pole, people looked upwards toward the snake. They saw past the snake was the heavens, and they realized that this was heaven sent. The punishment of the snakes was heaven sent. It was because of what they had done wrong, and therefore they would do teshuvah. They would repent, and by repenting, that would bring the healing. Just as the sin brings the disease, the repenting brings the healing. It's always the same message. So there's a lot to say about that, but I'm going to move on. The next topic we have in this parsha is chapter 21, verses 10 through 20, where we have a very mysterious description of some different geographical places that the Jews seem to travel on their way through the desert. There's a lot of deep meaning here that I'm not going to get into. Then suddenly it talks about, they sing about the well of water there. Why did they start singing about the well of water there? What's going on? I'm not going to get into it. Leave that a little bit mysterious for now. Chapter 21, verses 21 to chapter 22, verse 1, which is the end of the Parsha. We have the war with Sichon and Og. They come to the border with the Amorites, and you have Sichon, who's the king of a place called Bashan, where the Amorites live, and they send them a letter. They say, also, we'd like to pass through your land, please. And he says, not only will I not allow you to pass through my land, but I'm going to outright attack you. And so they go to war. Sichon and his nation go to war against Israel. They're destroyed. Then we have Sichon is in a place called Cheshbon. If I didn't say that, whatever I said, it's Cheshbon. Sichon is the king of Cheshbon, which is the Amorite nation. And another Amorite nation in Bashan, if I said Bashan before, I meant Cheshbon, with a king named Og, also comes out. One thing to know about the Amorites, that with these big, large people, Og is called, he's called someone who remained Meyaser HaRifaim. He was one of the Rifaim. The Rifaim were a people of giants that existed in ancient times. And the Torah tells us that Og was one of the remaining Rifaim, one of these enormous people. The Gemara has gargantuan descriptions of Og, how gigantic he was, and how Moshe defeats him by jumping 10 cubits in the air with a staff that was 10 cubits long, and Moshe himself was 10 cubits tall, and by a 10-cubit tall man jumping 10 cubits in the air and stretching out his 10-cubit staff and striking Og, he strikes him only at his ankle, and yet he slays Og at the ankle by doing this. Maybe this is the source of the idea of the Achilles heel, that the weak spot of Og was his ankle, and that's where Moshe struck him and slew him. That description is given in the Talmud, and there's deep symbolism there, which, again, I'm not going to go into during this hour, but it's sort of some basic first-grade information, story-wise, that I felt comes with the territory. Now, that's the end of the topics, and we're halfway through the hour. I gave you some nuggets along the way, but I want to focus on two topics, which are the idea of spiritual purity and impurity, and the concept of Moshe's sin. These are big topics which could fill the hour. So how I'm going to do both in half an hour, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But let's talk about spiritual impurity. What does it mean, spiritual impurity? This is totally misunderstood, because the Hebrew words are tum'ah. Tum'ah is translated as impurity or uncleanness, defilement. These are all incorrect translations. That's not what the word tum'ah means. The word for purity or spiritual cleanliness, whatever you want to call it, is tahor, mistranslated. I will tell you what these things actually mean. Tum'ah is from the root, the Hebrew word atum. The word atum in Hebrew means sealed or closed off or covered. Tum'ah means something which is sealed, closed off, or covered. sealed or closed off or covered from what? Let's look at the other word. Tahara, purity, I'm putting those in air quotes. It's not purity. Tahor is related to the word meaning light. How so? Because we have the word Zohar in Hebrew, Zohar, which means a bright, radiant light. We have the word Tzohar, Zohar, like with a Zion, a Z sound. Tzohar, like with a TZ sound. Tzohar, which also means a light. Yitzhar in Hebrew is oil, which is fuel for lighting. So Tzohar is the light Noach was told to put in the Teva. He was told to put in the ark a Tzohar. He had to make a light. There's a question if this was like a skylight, a window, or even a glowing crystal. There's a disagreement among the early commentaries what the Tzohar is, but Noach was told to make a source of light in the Teva, Tzohar. Zohar and Tzohar, these two letters, Zion and Tzadi, they interchange many times. Like you have the word Ze'aka, which means to call out, and Tze'aka, which also means to cry out, to scream out. Ze'aka, Tze'aka have the same word. Zohar, Tzohar, almost the same. The word Tohar, purity, Tohar, is also linguistically related because it's produced in the same part of the mouth. Last week we talked about guttural letters. Now we'll talk about what are called the dental letters. They're made with the teeth. Ta, za is made with the close proximity of the tongue to the teeth and passing air through it. Z, and then tsa, which the tongue touches the teeth and then the air passes through it. Ts. So you have z, it's open, the air flows between the tongue and the teeth. Ts, it starts in the closed position and opens, and then t, remains in the closed position. So that even you have also Tzaharayim. In other words, Tzaharayim, like Tzohar, means noon. Tzaharayim, it's when the Tzohar, it's when the light of the day is at its strongest. The sun is directly overhead. That's Tzaharayim. And and also we have, so Tohar, I'm not going to go too much into the words, but there are other words like this. Tseil in Hebrew means shade, and Tilala in Aramaic, which is a sister language, Tilala, Tseil, they're both meaning shade. This word, like in Aramaic, Tihara, means a certain type of a light, from the same word as Tohar, Zohar, Tzohar. You get my point. Anyway, Tohar means a certain radiance, a radiance of light. So if the opposite of Tohar, purity, is Tum'ah, a closeness, a sealed offness. So what it means is that this is essentially what it means. The Tohar is a transparency that allows spiritual light to pass through it. Here the light is spiritual. We're obviously talking about spirituality, and spirituality is depicted as light. I'm not going to go into that, but that I think that's somewhat self-evident. So the Tohar means that something is radiant with spirituality. The spiritual light is able to penetrate. It's able to go in, and it's able to go out. When it's Tameh, it's closed, sealed. There's a darkening there. We go from a transparency to an opacity. It becomes opaque. There's a covering that causes the light to be blocked. Spiritual light is not coming in, and spiritual light is not coming out. There's a blockage against spirituality. There's an inability to connect spiritually. That's what Tumah is. So when someone says, when a woman says, "Oh, you say menstruation makes a woman dirty, it makes her unclean," I hear this from women. What are we dirty? Like, no, it's nothing dirt. It's not unclean. It's just all wrong. It has to do with an openness to spirituality and a closed. Now, what is that based on? Here's what it's based on. Something if you haven't heard it before, you have to hear. Where there is life, there is potential. Where there is life, there is connection. The ultimate potential is life itself. Life, when our soul is in our bodies, the soul, which is an extension of God himself, is imbued within us. We have a connection to God, and we're able to, through that connection, through the performance of mitzvahs, create an energy that passes back and forth, that we are sending upwards, and that is sort of mirrored, reflected back, and we're able to uplift ourselves with that energy and then create a new wave and this constant back and forth connection of spiritual energy current, this spiritual light. And as long as the soul is connected in the body, so we have that access to that light. The death is the total negation of that potential, of that connection, of that life. So where the life is gone, where life potential is gone, and sets in tum'ah, a closeness to spirituality, a closeness to growth, a closeness to connection with God. And that is the most radioactive, that is the most toxic energy that there is the energy that negates our connection with God. That's where we go, tum'ah. It's impure, it's unclean. These are all euphemism, but it's just we are repelled by something that disconnects us from the life energy and the potential that is intrinsic in the connection to God and our soul. So the dead body conveys the ultimate impurity, and contact with it conveys that negativity into the one who contacts it, and he becomes this high level of impurity. He's actually not as high level as the dead body itself. Really, the dead body is the highest level. He is one removed, the person who contacts it, and then what he touches becomes another degree removed. And in terms of ritual procedures, there are certain things that can or cannot be done depending on the level gradation of impurity that's present. So that's where all these gradations become present when we get into the nitty gritty of certain ritual performances. But we're not going into those details. But anyway, so the dead body is the highest. Then the contact conveys that impurity, and so on. When we talk about the impurity, again, the tumah, the closeness to spiritual growth, that has to do with, let's say, a woman's menstruation, is because as long as prior to menstruation, what's happening in the body of the woman is the body is preparing itself to carry a life. It's preparing itself for that ultimate potential. And when that process breaks down and flushes out that potential life, it's the loss of that potential life. That gap, that hole becomes filled with this negative opposite energy. So we go from the purity to the impurity when life is lost or the potential for life is lost. That's why when a woman gives birth to a child and the life leaves her body, she becomes impure because the life that was there is now gone, and in its place is left this spiritual closeness that has to go through a process. Now, parenthetically, when a boy is born, it says it's 1 week. And when a girl is born, it says it's 2 weeks. So people use this as proof that the Torah is misogynist to say, a girl makes a woman 2 weeks impure when she's born. So we're saying girls are even worse than boys. And I'm telling you, from what I'm telling you, because it's the opposite. The potential that's lost when a boy is born is only for a week. But again, she's in the world, but that's has left the mother, so that the mother descends in her level of, so to speak, spiritual preparedness, openness, is twice as much when the girl goes out than when the boy goes out, because that's how much spirituality a girl has in her, double that of a boy, and that's a whole other topic. But, and so on and so forth. If a man has a seminal emission, he also becomes impure because it's that potential life that has exited the body, even if it's in proper marital relations. The fact that it's exited his body causes a drop in the level of spiritual openness, life potential, if you will, that's in him, and he has a 1-day cleansing process. The menstrual woman has a 7-day cleansing process according to the Torah. And it said the giving birth is 7 or 2 weeks. 7 days or 2 weeks, and so on. And again, death is always conveyed, tumah, spiritual so-called impurity, which is really a loss of life potential. A loss of life potential is always conveyed by a dead body where the loss is total, menstruation where there's some loss of potential, seminal emission where there's some loss of potential, and contact with different things thereof, the birth of a child where this additional life has left the woman's person and left a gap in its place. That's the idea of purity and impurity. So I just wanted to clear. I'm not solving the mystery of the red heifer. That if Solomon can't solve it, I can't solve it. But what I wanted to clear up when we're talking about the impurity that's conveyed by a dead body and the so-called purity that's brought about through the red heifer, how that exactly works is beyond me. But what are these two states of being? What are these concepts of spiritual purity or impurity, cleanliness or uncleanliness? They're both wrong translations. We say pure, impure, clean, unclean because we mean to convey the toxicity of the loss of potential of death and the desirability of the potential of life. But all degrees of so-called purity or impurity in the Torah are measures of life potential. Measures of life potential, because life is the ultimate potential. When the soul is in the body, we have that godly connection, and that's the ultimate connection. Then we have mitigating factors which bring it down, and that's the whole idea of so-called spiritual purity and impurity. Okay, moving on. Let's get to Moshe. Moshe, the sin of Moshe. Oh my goodness. Okay, so first, a little primer to this is the following. There must be, and I don't know when I did the research on this to know this number, but I have a number in my head. Something around, or more than, I just have this number in my head from years ago when I looked into this. 200 different opinions of what Moshe's sin was. What do you mean 200 different opinions? It says, God says speak to the rock and he hits the rock. But again, there is no clarity that is actually what Moshe's sin was. In fact, the Ramban, Nachmanides, one of the most classic commentaries on the Torah, says it was certainly not what the sin was. And of course he was supposed to hit the rock. Of course, when it doesn't mean they speak to the rock. When it says you should gather God says, take the staff in your hand. You and Aaron take the staff and go. What is he supposed to do with the staff? Right? Do ventriloquism? The staff. Hey, rock. What is he taking the staff for? The staffs are hitting. Moshe did all the miracles with the staff by hitting the water, hitting the dirt, hitting this, hitting that. That's all the staff did was hit to make miracles. Of course, God was telling Moshe, go take the staff and hit. What does it mean, speak? It doesn't mean speak to the rock, literally speak to the rock. It means when I say I'm gonna speak to that. In other words, I say, there's this very mysterious topic in the Parsha, and I'm going to speak to that. I'm going to speak to that. I don't mean I'm going to speak to it. I mean I'm going to speak about it. When God says, gather the people, take the rock, right, and speak, not the word to there doesn't mean speak to the rock. It means speak regarding the rock. And they give a speech. Moshe does give a speech. He says, Shimuna HaMirim, listen, you rebels, because what happened? They were complaining, right? Listen, you rebels, Hamenasela, Notzi Lachamaim, shall we make water come forth from this rock, right? So you speak to the people, gather them and speak to them about the rock. Take the staff because you're going to hit it just like you did before. The first time Moshe hit it. So it's the same. It's the same. So therefore, he comes up with another. Now, why does he have to go to such a length? Because what Aaron gets punished too. What did Aaron do? Right? So what's going on over there? Second of all, like again, what was the big deal? So speak to the rock. Hit the rock. He hit the rock. God's like, oh, you didn't have faith in me. You didn't believe in me. You didn't sanctify my name. You're not going to such a big deal over hitting the rock. It seems so strange that the Ramban, Nachmanides, says that can't be it. So he explains it a completely different way. What explanation he gives is not a topic for now. But in other words, it's very, very mysterious. So many commentaries explain it completely different than Moses hit the rock versus spoke to them. In other words, many agree with the Ramban that it is not at all abundantly clear that hitting the rock was the problem. Yes, that's the Rashi's interpretation, and it's the more classic interpretation, but there's so much disagreement about this. Why is it so significant? Some commentaries go so far as to write, listen to this, the Torah does not tell us what Moshe's sin was. It's like for Moshe's dignity, whatever, it's sort of like obscured. We don't know. We don't know what it was. In other words, this thing with the rock happened, and then God gives them a speech about their shortcomings. that wasn't it. It's just skipped altogether. Whatever he did wrong, the Torah doesn't tell us at all. So it's like an invisible sin. Now, why is that so strange? Here's why. Because in every other case when somebody sins in the Torah, it's not just spoken out in clear terms. It's blown up into a gargantuan big deal, a huge big deal. For example, I have to go through this introduction so you understand just how crazy what's going on in this parsha is. We have a section in Genesis. I have the citation somewhere, but I don't even want to take the time to look at my notes and waste the time. Genesis 35, verse 22. We have the section where it says that Reuben, the son of Yaakov, it says that he lays with his father's wife, right? He lays with his father's concubine, right? Oh my goodness, are you serious? One of the sons of Jacob lay with his concubine, with his father, right? With Jacob's concubine, his Ova. Can you believe that? That's crazy. Yeah, it is crazy. And a rabbi said that's not actually what happened. Actually, what happened is that Reuven moved Yaakov's bed from one tent into the other. Let me explain. Yaakov, I can't go through the whole story. Hopefully you know a little bit Bible. But Jacob married two sisters. He wanted to marry Rachel, who he felt was the most beautiful. Or it wasn't a beauty contest, but it says she was beautiful, and he was in love with her. Not over beauty. We're not that superficial, so I take that back. But he wanted to marry Rachel for whatever he saw in her. We know that Lavan, his uncle, tricked him, and he ended up marrying Leah, but he was allowed to marry Rachel 7 days later, but he had to work 7 years for each of them, and you know the whole story, right? Then Leah had children. Rachel was barren. She said to Jacob, take my handmaiden, marry her, have children with her. I'll raise her children. It'll be like, surrogate motherhood, but I'll this way I'll have children of my own. We know also from biology, sometimes there's a certain sympathy between women's bodies that if one woman in the house is giving birth, so the other one will also, she'll also begin to become fertile. It's been known to happen. And, maybe that was the idea. However, it was meant to work. She says, take my handmaiden, have children with her, and I'll raise the children. And then Leah says, no fair. You get to give him your handmaiden to have children with. In other words, you're going to outcompete me in the competition of children. Why was it a competition? They thought whoever had the most children, Yaakov would prefer them as the wife because she's the, so to speak, the main raiser of the children. So they were almost competing with each other for who could have more kids. So she takes her handmaiden and says, Jacob, you have kids with my handmaiden. So Leah says, no fair. If she can give you the handmaiden to have kids, you should take my handmaiden to have kids. And Leah gives her handmaiden. So Yaakov ends up with two wives and two concubines, and he's having children with all of them. Eventually, we know Rachel has 2 children, etc. Fine. But Yaakov, the Torah tells us, always loved Rachel the most. And because of this, he had separate tents with each of his wives. And he would visit each wife at a different time, and he would be with her in her tent. However, Yaakov had one tent that was his own tent, and he had a wife that shared a tent with him, right? So his wife that shared his tent was Rachel, because she was the one he originally wanted to marry, and this was his intended wife, and all the other ones just sort of came along for the ride, almost unintentionally on his part, almost naively. But he really wanted Rachel, and this was his primary wife. So what happened was Rachel dies. So all the years that he was with Rachel, of course, Leah felt second fiddle, and this wasn't great. And Leah's children felt, our father is not respecting our mother, but you know what? We can, he has Rachel, so what could we say? Rachel dies. Reuven, the firstborn son of Leah, says, aha, now my father is going to move his bed into the tent of my mother Leah, and this will be his tent, and he'll share a tent with my mother Leah. Finally, my mother will get the dignity that she deserves, that she shares the tent with my father. But Yaakov does not do this. Rather, he, after that point, shares his tent with Rachel's handmaiden, Bilhah. Why? Because as Rachel's handmaiden and the father and the mother of the children that Rachel raised, Bilhah reminded Yaakov of Rachel, and in his way of sort of coping with the loss of Rachel, he held on to Bilhah more than he held on to Leah. This was an affront that Reuven could not abide. And so without his father's knowledge, he took his father's bed and he moved it into the tent of Leah, and he said, this is where you belong. Now, this is totally inappropriate for a son to do in the face of his father, to disrespect his father in this manner. Whether he was right or he was wrong, to do this to his father was disrespectful. And the Torah describes this as laying with his father's concubine. But what it means is that he interfered in the marital relationship of his father and the concubine. So it's framed as an adulterous act, but not in so much as he committed an act of adultery, but that he meddled, he interfered, he broke up, he got between his father and his father's consort in a way that the Torah is extremely critical, because you, a righteous son of Israel, the father of one of the tribes, cannot behave on that level and get away with it. So on his level of righteousness, his sin is blown up so much more, because a person who's more competent, his failure is seen as a much greater failure than a person who's incompetent. A person on a low level, we say, well, I didn't expect much from you, so when you fail, it's not so big a failure. But the person who is the professional in his field, the top of his field, and he fails at his own profession, what's going on here? There's no forgiving that. I mean, there is forgiving that, but in other words, we have the right to be much more critical and harsh. This is your expertise. This is your area. How could a righteous person like Reuven do this? So it's not such a slight sin in itself, but even a sort of almost mundane act is described as something much more toxic. I want to give a couple more examples just to set up the Moshe thing, but I feel like I'm going to run out of time. Maybe one or two more examples. My point is that when a righteous person sins, the Torah blows up the sins of the righteous. Say, you righteous person, your small failure is a colossal failure relative to your level. If a smaller person than you would have done the same thing, we would have said, meh, slap on the wrist. But it's much more explosive. So when Reuven did this, the Torah said it was akin to adultery. This meddling in the marital relations of his father. Another example of this is we have when Joshua conquers the city of Jericho, he declares everything in the city cherem. Cherem means it's sort of sanctified and off limits from anyone to use for mundane purposes. No one's allowed to take from the spoils of Jericho. It's consecrated. Consecrated is the word I was looking for. And then it says that a fellow named Achan, this one guy Achan from the tribe of Judah, comes and takes something from the spoils, and this is how the Torah describes it. You ready? It says, and the children of Israel committed a trespass in the consecrated stuff, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerach, from the tribe of Judah, took from the consecrated stuff, and it kindled the anger of God over the children of Israel. Wait a second. Which was it? The children of Israel committed a trespass, or Achan committed a trespass? It was one guy. Achan did it. As the chapter goes on to find, they search around, they find him. This is the one guy, right? But it says the children of Israel, the whole nation. The whole nation. Why? Because the Jewish people are responsible for one another to teach and to correct the actions. If we allow something to go on, we're all culpable. But you see that the sin of one person in the Torah is described as something massive. And then in verse 11, this is the book of Joshua, chapter 7, verse 1. Verse 11, it says, Israel sinned, and they abrogated my covenant that I commanded them. And they took from the consecrated thing, and they stole, and they deceived, and they put in their vessels. 7 descriptions over Israel that they did all this. No, Achan did it. One guy did it, right? But what do you see? The Torah puts a huge emphasis on even a small act. It says this cannot be ignored. This is something very, very big. Now, I want to contrast that when in the next Parsha we're going to see Bilam, which is called Balak. The Parsha is called Balak. But in it, the sorcerer Bilam, he wants to curse the nation of Israel, and he ends up blessing them. God puts prophetic blessing in his mouth. And when in that prophetic blessing, he looks at the Jews and he's prophetically inspired, and he says, Lo hibet avin b'Yaakov v'lo amal b'Yisrael. God sees no crookedness in Israel, no wrongdoing in Israel, v'lo amal b'Yaakov, and no travail. No wrongdoing and no travail. In other words, we see all the time in the Torah, God's like, they're testing me, they're making me weary with their complaints, the Torah is full of criticism. And yet, when Bilam looks, what does Bilam see? Lo hibet avin b'Yaakov, God sees no wrongdoing in Jacob. Lo avin b'Yisrael, and there's no amal b'Yisrael. There's no toil among the Jews. So wait, which one is it? So no, when we're having an internal private conversation and we're having our little employee-employer review, and I need to give you constructive criticism to improve your performance, so I'm going to nitpick. All the Torah's criticisms are nitpicks. But an objective viewer looking from outside sees nothing wrong. And even God himself says, I also don't see anything wrong. As far as you're concerned, God's not criticizing us to others. God's word to others, this is my beloved son. He's the apple of my eye, it says. He's the pupil of my eye, he says in the book of Zechariah. And when you touch the nation of Israel, it's like you're poking me in the eye, right? God loves the Jewish people, and his criticisms are really things that are very small. And when it comes to other onlookers, he says, there's nothing here to see. Everything's great. Everything's perfect. Just internally, he takes a little nitpick, a little flaw. He says, let's polish a little bit. Let's polish. So we're just polishing, and yet boom, right? What's the setup here? The setup here is now we come to Moshe, the most righteous man arguably who ever lived. And his sin, oh man, if God blows up the sin of, other people for their righteousness, for the level that they're on, there's more examples, I don't have time. What's he going to do with Moshe's sin? So they're waiting for God to blow it up. God says, ready, I'm taking Moshe's sin and I'm blowing it up. Boo, 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 boo. 10 times magnification, 100 times magnification, 1,000 times magnification. I magnified Moshe's sin more than any other sin in the Torah. Now look and tell me what it is. And we're looking in the verses and we're rubbing our eyes and we're scratching our heads and we're saying, I don't see it. I don't see anything. I can't tell. What is it, God? And he says, that's how small Moshe's sin was. That after I magnify it more than anyone else's sin in the Torah, you still can't see it. That's what we have to understand. We go in, we don't know what Moshe's sin was. But I do want to share one idea before we stop. There's so many different interpretations, but I want to share one that I found very, very moving in the last couple of minutes. Moshe hits the rock the first time, but now he's told to speak to it. Let's go with that for now, okay? What was the problem that he didn't speak to it? Here's the idea that I want to convey. Before, when he was told to hit the rock the first time, that was before the Torah was given. Then you have to hit the rock. Now we're at the end of 40 years. We have had the Torah for a long time. We've grown a whole generation in the Torah. Now you don't have to hit. Now you can speak to bring the water out. What's the idea? The idea is that this was the symbolism that was meant to be conveyed to the Jewish people, and Moshe messed up this very important message that God wanted to convey, and that was the downfall. This was the message I wanted to convey. God said the ways of the Torah are soft. The ways of the Torah are gentle. The ways of the Torah are beautiful. But they're so powerful in their softness, in their gentleness, in their beauty, that they could even penetrate a rock and bring water out. Like the story of Rabbi Akiva, which I would love to have more time. But Rabbi Akiva was a sage who grew up 40 years totally ignorant of the Torah. And after 40 years, he went to yeshiva and he was unable to comprehend anything. And he was ready to quit. And he ran away. And as he's running away, he comes upon a rock. And the rock is being run through with water. It says it was like a rock that was a well. A well had sort of bored itself into the rock. From running water, drop by drop, this rock had been carved into a well. And people are taking from the well, and Akiva says, how could a rock become a well from water? A rock is so hard and water is so soft. And they said, Akiva, do you not know the verse in Job? It says, Avonim shochek umayim. It says that even water can break a stone. Even water could break a stone. Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, says the same thing, right? But we won't go there. So, right, a thing as soft as water could break a thing as hard as rock. It's from Job. And Rabbi Akiva says, wait a minute. If something as soft as water could break a thing as hard as rock, then surely the words of God from the Torah, which are much more powerful than water, can break through this heart of flesh. I'm going to go back to yeshiva and try again. And he goes and he masters the Torah more than anyone of his generation. And this was the message of God. He says, you have a Torah. You have a Torah that it's speak to the rock. The ways of the Torah are soft and sweet, but it could penetrate. Even the hardest heart can be penetrated by the Torah. And Moshe, yes, before he had to hit the rock, he didn't have the Torah yet. So we have to manipulate people's behavior by force. All of our behavior has to be sculpted by society through behavior management and force. But if you have a Torah, you can transform yourself into a person who's godly, and the good behaviors come not through external force, but they come from within. The water that's compared to the Torah, which is compared to the water. So bring the water out of the rock with softness. That's the message of the Torah. That's the parting message God wanted to convey to the Jewish people. And for whatever reason, that Moshe, again, we don't have time to go into why Moshe did not come through. Leave it for now. But why was it so significant? Because in the end of the day, like, I hit the rock, what's the big deal? This was a big deal. I wanted you to show the people that this is my way. Diracheha darchei noam, Shlomo HaMelech says. The Torah's ways are ways of pleasantness. V'chol nesivoseh shalom, and all its paths are peace. Speak to the rock to bring out the water. Don't hit. And Moshe hit, and the Jews lost that message. They lost that beautiful message. So Hashem said, you didn't sanctify me in front of the Jewish people. And here, just the last thing, I'm sorry I'm over time. But lo ha'eman to me, you didn't, so to speak, believe in me or have faith in me. Grammatically, leha amin is in a grammatical form called hif'il. I'm getting a little technical, but just bear with me, which is a causative form. It actually doesn't mean to believe. It means to cause to believe. Lo ha'eman to me, you didn't cause the people to believe in me, meaning to make that connection of love between me and the Jewish people, that I wanted to have a belief through love, a relationship through love, not through fear, not through coercion, not through force, but through love and volition and free will and desire. That's what I wanted to teach the people through the symbolism, through the imagery of speaking to the rock to bring forth water. And that's where you failed, Moshe. And that's why the consequence was so heavy. I know I didn't answer all the questions for this evening, but we are out of time. I think we said a lot of valuable things. So I'm going to turn it back to William. Thank you so much. Have a great week.
That was great. Thank you. So I've been studying the Torah, I guess you could say, for about 10 years, using different lectures from like Chabad.org, because they have like tons of resources, and so each week I would download like 10 to 20 different lectures. I would listen to them all, like everything, and I was, after a while it seems like I've heard it all, but some of the stuff you mentioned today I've never heard it before, so this is refreshing even for me. So it's really nice.
I have, full disclosure, some of what I said tonight, particularly about the Moshe thing, it's based on many, many ideas that I've come across, but I put my own original spin on it. So it has an original Rabbi Mollot recipe, that last bit.
That was truly delicious, no doubt about it. That's going to be a great meal for everybody.
The Torah's delicious.
It is. So thank you, my friend. Great job as usual. I look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. And and that's it. So you guys should have a great week. Thank you all very much. And hope you all enjoyed it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on all notifications. I couldn't figure out where my camera was. There it is. so you don't miss a beat. Y'all have a wonderful week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all. Shalom, everybody.
שוב